tardes, bienvenidos a Shituf. Hoy tenemos el agrado de presentar a la doctora Perry Sinclair. La doctora Perry Sinclair, directora de la Fundación Tali en Israel, realizó su maestría en educación en el Instituto de Educación del Seminario Teológico Judío en Nueva York, y en esta misma institución recibió su doctorado en Midrash. Tali es una organización en el marco de los institutos Shechter, que están relacionados con el movimiento masoretí, que se dedica a la educación judía en escuelas públicas en Israel. Y tengo el honor también de comentarles que junto con la doctora Sinclair y con el profesor David Golinkin hemos cerrado un acuerdo por el cual a partir de ahora Masorti Olamí va a distribuir los productos de Tali en pantuflas, Tali Benalei Bait, en 8 idiomas a través de nuestras comunidades alrededor del mundo judío. Gracias, doctora Sinclair, por participar con nosotros en esta actividad de Shituf.
Welcome to the Shechter campus. It's home to the Shechter Institute of Jewish Studies, the Shechter Rabbinical Seminary, the Tali Education Fund, where I work, and Midrashet Shechter. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Perry Sinclair. I'm the director of the Tali Education Fund in Israel. And I'm very happy to have been invited to speak with you at the Shituf conference. I thank Masorti Omlat and Masorti Olami for inviting me, and I welcome you into my office here at Tali in Jerusalem. Maybe I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Israel. You might not believe me, given my accent, but I promise I was. I'm actually a graduate of the Tali school in Hod HaSharon. I grew up in the Masorti Shul in Hod V'Hadar. I was active in Noam. I was the chairperson of Noam many, many years ago. And I spent my adult career working in Jewish education in Israel and in North America. I received my master's in Jewish education from the Davidson School of Education at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and a doctorate in Midrash from the Jewish Theological Seminary as well. My husband Alex and I live in Modi'in, where we raise 3 very inquisitive and thoughtful liberal Jewish children. If we were live right now, I'd ask you all to write in your chat 3 reasons which made you choose to live where you live today. Why did you choose to live in your town, in your country? Why did you move from where you were born and grew up? Why did you choose your neighborhood? Why did you choose the street you live on? But since we're not live, I'll tell you why I chose where I live. When we moved back to Israel nearly 14 years ago after living in the United States, we looked for a town that was diverse. We looked for a place with a lot of greenery and parks where we could raise our children. And most of all, we looked for a Jewish liberal community. And we ended up moving to Modi'in. We'd never been there before. We moved there because our friend told us that there were a lot of different liberal options within Modi'in connected to the Masorti movement. There was a communal school where we could send our children, and there was a young and vibrant atmosphere. If we dig deeper, and I tell you why I chose the place I live currently, my house, it's because we drew a circle around the neighborhoods where our friends live, and we made sure that we were in walking distance so we could visit them on Shabbat. Now I want to give you 2 more introductions to our discussion today. The first one relates to, again, to my children. I'm very lucky my children are readers. When they were young and we stopped reading to them before they went to bed, I made sure to read every book they read. So if they read Harry Potter, I read Harry Potter, which I admit I really enjoyed. If they read Greek philosophy, I read Greek philosophy. If they read Heroes of Olympus, I read the Heroes of Olympus. And if they read whatever, the Wimpy Kid, I went and read the Wimpy Kid. And I did these things because I wanted to be a part of their conversation. I wanted to be able to talk about what was on their minds when we sat together for dinner. That's the first introduction. The second introduction is to share with you something about an exhibit in the Diaspora Museum. Now, for fair disclosure, I used to work there. I was taken there for the first time when I was 8. My father took me on a date to the Diaspora Museum when I was 8. So you can picture the house I grew up in. And I was really taken by the models of the synagogues in the community section of the museum. Now, on the first floor, right as you entered the museum, which tried to give 5 different answers to the question, how is it that the Jewish people are still here, there was a model of a 13th century Jewish community in Poland. The model wasn't very pleasing to the eyes. It was kind of, I guess, waist high on a table. When you approached it, it looked like a box. Many people who went to the museum skipped over that because they didn't really know what to do with it. If you looked at it, it was kind of shaded, and it wasn't really clear what the artist wanted to depict in this model. But if you got closer and you kind of peeked through the cracks that were between the walls of this box, what you saw on the inside were very, very bright, white, like well-lit walls and different institutions of a community with people milling around. And what the artist wanted to say was that Jewish communities in the Middle Ages in Europe might have been surrounded by walls, but these were walls that were put up by choice, and they enabled the Jewish community to thrive because everything they needed in order to exist as a community was within the boundaries of that community, and to them that was a positive thing. If we were sitting together around a table in a room at the moment, what I would do is give out chivrut study sheets. Since we're not together, I've prepared a chivrut study sheet, which you should be able to see at the moment on the wall. And what we'll do is we'll read it through together, and I guess I'll talk about it, but I'll ask you to reflect on the things that are in that text. The text is taken from the Babylonian Talmud, from the tractate Sanhedrin, page 17. It also appears in a few other places, but this is the original text. And it is taught in a Baraita, which is a Mishnaic text from the period of the rabbis around the 2nd century AC. A Torah scholar is not permitted to reside in a city that does not have these 10 things. Okay, so the passage is setting up a scenario to teach us to teach us what institutions we as Jews need in order to live in a town. More accurately, it's talking about a Talmid Chacham, right? A sage. What does a sage need in the town he's going to live in? Again, if we were together, I'd say, turn the page over and let's think what these 10 things might be. Okay, so if we reflect back on my story, why I chose the town that I live in, these 10 things might be cleanliness, they might be parks, they might be schools, maybe a good bus system, right? Good transportation system to get from point A to point B, maybe centrally located, right? Again, Modi'in is right in the center of town. We're equidistant from Tel Aviv and from Jerusalem. Okay, but we're back in the text now in the Talmud. Here are the 10 things. A courthouse that has the authority to flog and punish. Okay, a courthouse that can punish those who commit crimes. 1. 2, a charity fund for which monies are collected by 2 people and distributed by 3. So the community needs to have a tzedakah organization, right? And the tzedakah organization has to have more than one person in charge of collecting the money, right? So there has to be a responsible organization, a responsible committee, and 3 people that give it out, again, to make sure that things are given out equitably. That was 2. A synagogue, 3, a Beit Knesset, a synagogue, and a bathhouse. Okay, this is the Talmud. We need a bathhouse. There's no running water in the houses, so we need a place to maintain cleanliness. Maybe a mikveh. a public bathroom. Again, people didn't have running water in their homes. A doctor. And a blood letter. Okay, Rashi says that the doctor is the mohel, and the blood letter is a function that had to do with healing in that period, and a scribe. Okay, someone to take notes and to record what goes on in the community, and a ritual slaughterer, a shochet, so they could have what to eat, and a teacher of young children. There's my school. They said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, the city must also have varieties of fruit, because varieties of fruit illuminate the eyes. Maybe that's the playgrounds that I spoke about. So these are 10 things that a community needs to have if all you sages want to go and live there. The questions that I would ask if we were together again would be, what institutions does your community offer? Okay, what institutions does your community offer today? And I understand that I'm facing rabbis and cantors and community leaders and lay leaders. What institutions do you offer your communities? And then the second question would be, what other institutions should a 21st century Jewish community offer? What things do we not offer today that maybe we should be offering our people? So speak amongst yourselves, or think amongst yourselves. Our communities today aren't the same communities that were depicted in that shtetl, in the model that I showed you a few minutes ago. Some of our communities aren't even geographically connected. Some of our communities are dispersed, right, across regions, across towns, countries. Masorti Amlat is all over South America. So the question I ask myself as a Jewish educator, and I ask you, is how do we maintain the connectivity between the different people in our community? How do we create the web that connects people, that links people? How do we create interdependence? How do we encourage collaboration? How do we maintain arvut hadadit, mutual responsibility for the people in our communities if we don't see them every day? I think that as communities, we need to create institutions that complement this new setup, communal setup. It might not be ideal, but that's what we have. These are the things, this is the situation we have to deal with today. And as a community, we need to think about it. I think that this conference, the Shituf event that's happening for the 5th time from what I understand, and everything Masorti does in Amlat and in the world, Masorti Olami, are great examples of what we need in this day and age. I think our institutions need to get better at collaborating and not competing with each other. On a personal level, I've put a lot of effort in creating a shtetl for my family, right? It might not be a physical shtetl, but it's a close-knit web of relationships with people who nurture my family and help us maintain our identity and help my children grow up the way I think is right for them to grow up today as Jews. I want to share another picture from the Diaspora Museum. You see, I've got a little bit of an itch there, and they've just redone the museum. I haven't been there, and I can share that I'm a little worried about going because I really like the old exhibit. This picture, if you remember the museum, and I imagine many of you have been there, this was right at the entrance to the section that they called the Gate of Faith, Sha'ar HaEmunah. And that's where all the models of the synagogues were from around the world. This model, you can see in the picture, was like a 3D statue of a room with benches. So clearly it was a synagogue. Unfortunately, it wasn't a Masorti synagogue. Not only are there no women there, but there's not even a mechitza. But we're going to put that aside. There are 9 people in this little room in different stages of preparing for prayer. So some of them are taking their coats off, and some of them are laying tefillin. There's a young boy, there's an old man, and there are only 9 of them. And what the artist wanted to say, or what I understand the artist wanting to say, is that faith is believing that the 10th person will arrive. And indeed, if you peek through the door of that model, I don't know where it is today, I hope it's being taken care of. If you peek through the door, the 10th man is at the door. So the community had faith that the 10th man would come and enable them to perform the ritual they wanted to perform. And again, this ties into what I was saying before. How do we maintain this model where we know that we can depend on each other, we can rely on each other, we can be there for each other, and we could ensure the continuity of the Jewish people for the next generation? And now I get to tell you a little bit of what I do. So the Tali Education Fund has been around for 40 years. It was established to support the Tali schools, which were founded in Israel in the late 1970s by parents, by families who made aliyah, mostly from North America, and couldn't find an educational setting for their students, for their children. These people came from North America. They grew up in liberal communities. They grew up in day schools, in community day schools, and they came here and they could either go to a Dati school, religious school, or they can go to a Chiloni school, a secular school. The Dati school was very focused on halakha and what the kids did at home and what their mothers wore or didn't wear. The Chiloni schools taught very little Judaism at all. There was very little Jewish education. They touched on holidays, they maybe did Shabbat, but it was mostly on a very, very simple elementary level, and it didn't meet the requirements of these people who made aliyah and came to live in the Jewish state, but didn't find institutions where they could raise their students. And they established the first Tali schools. The Tali Education Fund was established a few years later to support these schools. And what Tali has done for over 40 years is provide educational resources, professional development opportunities, textbooks, games, experiential activities for these schools, for the school community, more at the beginning than now, but for the school community at large. Tali is also linked with Tali Amlat. I imagine some of you might be familiar with Tali Amlat, and I'm very proud that we have that connection. And we've also provided materials for schools in North America, and today we're writing educational resources for communities in Europe as well. So that's what Tali did. We mainly focused on the formal educational setting. I think the COVID pandemic, which we've all lived through together, and some of us unfortunately are still struggling with more than others, brought our children's education back into the home. It brought our children's schools into the living room, onto the dining room table, whether we liked it or not. As parents, and now I'm speaking as a parent and not as a professional, we became more involved in our children's education. I think for some people this was a natural, a natural thing, and for others it was a real shock to the system. I think it was a reminder that our children's education is our responsibility. You can't just send the kids off to school and expect them to come home, fully molded and taken care of and educated. So over the past year, Tali has created new platforms in order to try and bridge the gap between school and home. And in general, it's one of the things that I see as our mission for the coming years. I think that, I strongly believe that our culture is very rich and vibrant. It's intellectually challenging, it's spiritual, it's all-encompassing, and all we have to do is open the door and let it in. The homeschooling, essentially, that we experienced during the COVID pandemic reminds me of the children's books that I read, that I told you about earlier when we first started. It gave us a glimpse into what the children do in school, into their formal education, and as an educator, provided me with an opportunity, us at Tali, with an opportunity to create those bridges between what happens in school and what happens at home. There's an old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I think that's all the more true when you talk about a Jewish child. It really takes a village. What we did at Tali was we seized this opportunity and we created a new platform for family education, which we called At Home with Tali, or in Hebrew, Tali B'nalei Bait, Tali in slippers. The goal of these materials were to reach in to everyone's home or to anyone who opened their door and offer them resources that deal with the new Jewish months and with the value that arises from that month. So in the month of Shvat, when we started in January, we spoke about relationships, which tie into Tu B'Shvat, the relationship with the land. It ties into what in Israel is Yom HaMishpacha, Family Day, the relationships within the family. Shvat. In Adar, we spoke about power. It stemmed from the book of Esther, Megillat Esther, and talked about power, when we use power in a positive way, when power is possibly negative. Again, tying in to family dynamics and things that happen at home. Shvat Adar, Nisan. In the month of Nisan, we spoke about memories. Again, tying into Pesach and the Seder and telling our story, V'higadet lemincha. We spoke about memories in general. In the month of Iyar, in which we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut in Israel and we remember the fallen soldiers, we spoke about home, the idea of home, a national home, a personal home, a community, a communal home. And in the month of Sivan, we spoke about presents, about gifts, stemming again from the idea of bikurim in Shavuot, and what gifts we give, different types of gifts in Jewish tradition and at home in our families. For the month of Tammuz, I don't know what we're talking about yet. It's actually being written these days since I'm filming this 2 weeks early, and you should receive it tomorrow morning. The idea, again, was to create this bridge, right? It's a tool which schools could tie into and then send home to the families who can connect, right? Who can link into the ideas being discussed in school and really bring it home. It's not a textbook, right? It's a digital platform. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can pick and choose. There are fun activities, there's short videos. Really, there are a lot of different avenues, a lot of different paths that different families could tie into in order to bring the Jewish conversation into their home, into their house. I thought I'd share something from the edition that we put out in Sivan, which will maybe give you a picture of Tali's outlook, how we see education, how we see Jewish sources, and I thought you'd like it. I did. There's a famous passage right at the beginning of Mishneh Avot, the ethics of the fathers, that talks about the passing of the Torah, the oral law from Moshe. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, passed it on to Joshua. Joshua passed it on to the elders passed it on to the prophet, etc. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. Once again, just like that statue from Beit HaTfutzot, there are no women in the passage. Obviously, it was written thousands of years ago in a patriarchal society, and that's the text we received. But what we did in Tali at home, in Tali B'Naalei Bayit, is we brought a midrash, which was written by a female rabbi by the name of Rinat Tzfanya, who took this midrash and adapted it to the Torah that Miriam received at Sinai and passed it on to the daughters of Tzlofchad, who passed it on to Dvorah, the prophetess, who passed it on to Ruth, and so on. The end of the passage in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, is V'ha'amidu talmidim harbe, train many students and make a fence for the Torah, right? Protect the Torah. The end of the midrash that Rabbi Tzfanya wrote reads, V'ha'amidu talmidot harbe, have many female students, V'asu drash laTorah, and learn the Torah and teach the Torah and drash the Torah and elaborate the Torah and make the Torah your own, essentially. And that's one of the main things that Tali education promotes. We promote a deep understanding of Jewish text, right? Passing on Jewish literacy to the next generation, but also embracing our tradition as our own, making it our own, and finding ways to make Jewish tradition, Jewish life, Jewish ritual relevant and meaningful to who we are and where we are today. I think, again, the challenge that we face today as parents, as educators, as community leaders, as Jews, is strengthening the ties between us, building sustainable communities that have what to say to our communities, that have what to say to our people, that have what to say to our students, there's nothing we can do about it. Our communities and our tradition has to compete with a lot of other things that go on in our students' lives, and we need to provide a culture, a vibrant lifestyle, which will engage them and want them to be a part of it. We have to create engaging, meaningful educational opportunities that people will want to choose to be a part of, and we have to do it together. We have to bring the schools and the communities and the synagogues and the people together to weave that web that once was held up by a wall, by a geographical, physical wall. We need to weave a virtual web so we can continue to do this together. Before we end, I just want to say a few words about this past year. I think we've all had a really rough year. And I know that the COVID pandemic is still very bad in Latin America. And I really appreciate your time spending it here with me and at this conference during these times. I think the world is in need of healing, of refuah nefesh, healing of the soul, refuat guf, healing of the body, around the world, in Israel. I hope that the next time Shituf comes together, it's in person. And I want to invite you all to come visit us here at Tali in Israel when you're next here, so that we could embrace and shake hands and get away from the screens. But given that this has been on screen, I want to thank you for your time and wish you a great rest of the conference.